Here we want to talk about estimating the number of taps in your sugar bush. This is an essential part of what you're going to be doing because you need to know what you have to work with. Right? It's kind of like thinking that you're going to go pick apples from apple trees and you don't know how many apple trees you're going to have. It's a non sequitur. You wouldn't start without knowing how many trees you have available to tap. So we're going to talk about two different methods, and I'm going to tell you what I think is the most efficient method, but you can use either one. Is going to be as accurate as the other. The process that we're going to use is valuable because you can use the same process to accomplish measurement for other objectives. You want to know how many firewood trees you have per acre. Maybe you want to build a barn. You want to know how many pine trees you have per acre. You can use the same methodology for other kinds of objectives. The key phrase here is estimate, right? And that's because if we're not estimating, then we are enumerating. And can you imagine going into an acre, and this is probably you're looking at a quarter of an acre of woods. Can you imagine having to walk onto that quarter acre and count every one of those trees? And let's say your sugar bush is actually 10 acres or 20 acres in size. Trying to count every tree on every acre would drive you nuts, and it would be inaccurate because you just can't keep track of that things. So we're going to sample. You've heard the word sampling. It means that you select specific individuals and you use that sample to represent the entire population. So sampling measures a subset of the total. You get increased efficiency and accuracy. It assumes that you're able to select the subset without bias. So when you're counting your tappable trees, if you always go to the area where the trees are the biggest, or if you always go to areas where there's no raspberries or it's dry, not wet, then you're biasing your sample. And so then you're going to have an inaccurate estimate. You'll have an estimate, but it won't be accurate. The beauty is that this is an extremely well-established theory. It's in the theory of statistics, and the application of it, the practice of it, is also very well established. So what you're looking at here is a piece of property that we used to own, and the northwest corner of that property was all sugar maple. And so I had separated out a management unit, and I'm illustrating what would be a grid of dots here, represented as dots, where I would go out and collect my samples. So it's a systematic grid. Here it is in close-up. I recommend using some kind of a systematic grid. Those dots don't look very systematic, do they? The one in the upper right should be bumped up a little bit. But assume a systematic grid. You would put in about 1 per acre, and so if you're using a square grid, you'd be about 200 feet by 200 feet between grid points. But then the question is, so you go out into the woods, and you're going to have to use a compass or some way to find your way around the woods because the red dot isn't on the ground, and you need to know where to stop. When you stop, how do you pick the trees that are part of your sample? I mean, that's the fundamental question. How do we select which trees to measure? So that's what we're going to look at. There's 2 ways to do it. We can use sample plots, and a plot is an area of fixed size, for example, 1/10 of an acre, or we're actually going to talk about 1/20th of an acre. They can be circular, they can be square, they could be triangular, they could be trapezoidal. They need to be of a known area. They're time-consuming to set up, but the mathematics are trivial, and you essentially measure whatever it is you're interested in on the plot. And if you're using a 10th acre plot, you multiply whatever you count by 10, and that's your estimate of whatever it is you're counting. In our case, tappable trees. That means tappable trees per acre would be 10 times whatever you found on a 10th acre plot. If you put in a 1/4 acre plot, you would multiply times 4. The alternative method is to use sample points. So we're going to talk about plots and points. The points are very time efficient. You will have your point done in less time than it would take to lay out the plot. It's the mathematical theory is very intense. The good news is they've already worked out the mathematical theory. You don't need to do that, so it can be very easy to apply. So let's look at first the example, the fixed radius plot. What we'd recommend is you use, and did you get handouts associated with this? I think these were going to be sent out, or maybe they're posted to the class website. There's a class on the class website. There either is or will be a handout that talks about how to conduct these two different methods. We'll talk through them here. So the fixed radius plot, and I recommend a circle just because it's easier to set it up. You can see the picture I have illustrated here. We have one person holding a tape measure, and then the tape measure is stretched out. In this case, it's attached to a wooden stake. You could do that if you have just one person. If you have two people, one person holds each person holds one end of the tape. And then you spin the circle, right? You just walk, the outside person walks around, and when you come to a tree, you got to move in and out like spokes on a wheel. And you just count the trees. And so you're going to count, our recommendation, and Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, but we use 10 inches as the minimum diameter. So you're going to count every maple tree that's at least 10 inches in diameter. And if the tree is at least 18 inches in diameter, you'll double count those. If you're using a 1/20th of an acre plot, every tree that you count represents 20 trees. So this is what the tally sheet looks like, and you either do or will have an example of this, and it describes it there. Use a tape measure or rope to create a circular plot with a radius of 26.4. Count all 10-inch diameter trees and larger within the plot. So that says that should be 18 inches. Stems larger than 18 inches can be counted twice because you're going to put 2 taps in those. You don't need to actually measure the diameter of the stems. That's an advantage here. You just count the number of stems, and then you multiply it times 20. I like using what's called the dot dash system. So here we have plot 1, plot 2, plot 3. You can see that you go across, we have up to 10 plots. Remember, you're going to want to do 1 plot per acre, and then each dot represents a tree. And when you get 4 dots, like in plot number 2, the 5th tree is represented as a line, and you can see in plot 4, we have 4 dots plus 2 lines. That makes 6 trees. So the value, I mean, you can use, you've also seen you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? That's another slash tally method. So the dot dash tally is space efficient. You can use any system that you want so long as you know at the end that there were a certain number of trees in plot 1 and a certain number of trees in plot 2. You multiply by the plot multiplier. A 20th acre plot is going to have a multiplier of 20. There are your taps per acre based on an individual plot, but you need to average those, so you add them together, divide by the number of plots, and you end up with an estimate of 88 taps per acre. So that's it. That's as simple as it gets. It's just laying out the plot, spinning the circle, and counting the trees. Okay, so that's plot sampling. Point sampling, and you should have, I'll show you a picture. This, I think you received that as a printed copy. Did anybody get that as a paper copy, and then you were going to cut it out if you wanted to use it? Anybody get that? Yes, no? Yep, okay, good. All right, so you have that. My understanding is you're going to get the actual beast to download as well. Okay, so those are going to be put in the mail to you. You'll receive those in the mail, so you'll have a plastic version of that. So the point sampling uses what's called an angle gauge. You can also use a prism. What you have or will receive is an angle gauge. And the angle gauge simply controls the angle through of eyesight, right? So you're looking through that window in the tree. There's this window in the angle gauge. That's the window. You're looking through the window at the tree at about 4.5 feet above ground. If the tree fills the window, the tree is considered in, and it's selected for measurements. Okay? That's as simple as it is. So you can imagine a big tree is going to be more likely to fill the window than a small tree. Because of that, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the number of taps is represented by an in tree, and it depends upon the stem diameter. So we have to, with the plot sampling, I shouldn't say before, with the plot sampling, every tree represented 20 trees, or whatever the plot multiplier was. This is the mathematics of this, remember I said, are more intense. We're not going to describe the mathematics. You'll just take this is the faith of mathematics. But let's first look at how does the angle gauge know which tree to pick. It's actually very simple. What happens is each tree has a physical shadow. So when the sun is out, it casts a shadow. You've all seen a shadow on the ground. Each tree also has a mathematical shadow. And what the angle gauge is telling you is whether or not you are standing inside the mathematical shadow of that tree. So imagine the physical shadow. On a hot day, you walk out and you stand in the shadow of that tree. And as the sun moves around, if the shadow goes across you, you could say, okay, I'm going to count that tree. Well, we don't have all day to wait for the sun, and sometimes the sun doesn't shine, so we're going to rely on the mathematical shadow. So you're going to stand at one point, and you're going to look at all the nearby trees, and you're going to say, am I standing inside the shadow of the tree? Big trees have big shadows, right? So there's the mathematical shadow of a big tree, and then we have a smaller tree has a smaller shadow. So if this is if this is your sample point, this red dot, you stand in the woods and you would look at all of these trees through the angle gauge. This tree, you're standing inside the shadow. This tree, you're also standing inside the shadow. This tree, you're not standing inside the shadow. So you're standing at one point and you're looking at all of these trees around you and you're saying, and you're just using the angle gauge. If the tree fills the window of the angle gauge, then you count that tree for the number of taps. So there's going to be a whole bunch of trees and you're going to look at all of them. Okay. The way this is set up, and you could actually make one of these, the first one that I ever owned I made, use a ratio of 1 to 33. Or you can see that a penny, a 1-cent penny, pretty much is the width of the window. It's not exactly the width of the window, so instead of, well, we'd have to do some really intense mathematics. But if you're in a pinch, you can use a penny. So if you have your angle gauge, or just use your thumb, or if you have a penny, then pick up a penny. So the window, you would look through the window, or if you're using your thumb, and your thumb is usually a pretty close approximation, if the tree is as wide or wider than your thumb, then you would count that tree. So everybody's going to say yes for this one. And when I do this in a classroom, there's people that are sitting close to the screen would say, oh, the tree in the foreground, this tree in the foreground, yes, it's in, but the people that sit in the back of the room, when they look through that window, the tree doesn't fill the window. So for the people in the back of the room, they would not count that tree. And then if people want to get, really feisty, I say, okay, let's look at some of these smaller trees. Look at that one. Look at this one. Look at this one. To those smaller trees. And so if you're holding your thumb up, the tree that you see in the middle is as wide or wider than your thumb, or if you have your angle gauge, then it's going to completely fill the angle gauge, but the smaller trees that I circled are not. So you're only going to count those trees that fill the window. And you're going to stand in one spot, and you're going to look at each of those trees, and you're going to assess each of those trees as to whether or not it fills the window. If it fills the window, in this case, you need to measure the diameter. So you have this is a tally sheet that's provided as a downloadable form, and there are two different versions of this. They're both basically the same. You need to know what the diameter of the tree is, and you can round it to the nearest 2 inches is fine. Now, if you're doing research, you would measure down to the nearest 1/10 of an inch. For the purposes that we're describing, you can measure eyeball it to the nearest 2 inches. And you can use a scale. There are different ways that you can measure the diameter of the tree. I think I actually made a YouTube video on that. I can send that link out. So once you know the diameter, you count the trees. And so here we did 5 points. You accumulate all of the counts. All of the trees are counted. So there was 2 trees there, 8 trees, 6, 10, 8, and 10. Now, remember, once we get, oh, goodness, I can't draw a straight line to save my life. So once we get above 18 inches, we're going to multiply times 2. So before we had a multiplier that was the same for every tree. That's why we didn't need to know diameter. Here, and I can explain the mathematics if somebody asks, but I won't until somebody asks. The multipliers are different. So the smaller the diameter trees have a bigger multiplier, the bigger diameter trees have a smaller multiplier. But because each 18-inch tree represents, and 20-inch trees larger than 18 inches represent 2 taps per tree, we're going to double those. So it could either be 2 times 8 for the 18, or it could be 2 times 5.7. It doesn't matter because of algebraic order of operations. So then the right-hand column, in this case, gives you the number of taps per diameter for all 5 points. You add that up, divide by 5, and it gives you an estimate of the number of taps per acre. Okay, your head is swimming because you're thinking that's more math than I've thought about in a very long time. But it's just simple multiplication. If we come back to just remembering that what you're trying to do is look through that angle gauge, and you simply ask the question, does the tree fill the window? And then I always go in a clockwise direction. Sometimes I'll put a piece of ribbon, or I'll always start directly north because you don't want to count a tree more than once. And you just spin the circle, and you're looking at every tree, and if the tree fills the window, then you count that tree. You can forget the mathematical shadow if you want. That's just a little bit of explanation. If the tree fills the window, count the tree. And you need to know, when you count the tree, you need to know what the diameter is. You record the number of 10-inch trees, 12-inch trees, and so forth. Record the number of points that you visit. Do the math. Divide by the number of points, and there's your answer. All right. Here's the other sample sheet that you will see. So I just filled this in. I didn't actually do the dot dash, but let's say you had, so in this case, TPP is taps per point. So we have 3, and then the multiplier is 15.2. 3 times 15.2 is 45.6. And this is the first point, so you would do that for all of the diameters. The first point, all of the diameters of the second point, sum each row here, sum the final column, divide by the number of points. Okay, now, if you're really fast, you notice that here the multiplier was 15.2, and here for the first column, it's 18.3. The difference is because here the range is from 9 to 11, and here it's actually it's a different range, so it's from 10 to 12. All right, so the summary of this is that, first of all, it's important to take the time to estimate the number of taps per acre. It's a very simple process. The first point or plot that you put in is going to take you a long time, and it's going to be frustrating, and you're not going to be sure of what you're doing. But as you do 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 of these points, they'll go very fast. The points, you will do a point in less than a minute. Okay, once you get comfortable doing this. And this is an important thing if you have 2 sugar bushes that you're evaluating and you're saying, I can't do both of them this year, where do I start? Well, knowing how many taps you have per acre might be an important decision, piece of information to make your decision on. So take the time to estimate the number of taps per acre. Be careful not to bias your sample. And my recommendation is that you want to use point sampling because it's going to be as easy or easier than plot sampling. So when we show this to groups of people like at Cornell Maple Camp, we show them both methods. Nobody wants to do the plot sampling. Everybody wants to do the point sampling. So with that, I'm going to stop. And I can stay as long as you all want to stay, but we should, because other people, y'all may have things you have going on. We may want to have we'll have time for at least a few questions. How's that? And Mike is still here, so I'm going to turn hopefully Mike's not singing. There we go. Mike turned his microphone on. So if we have questions and I can't answer them, I'm going to kick the can over to Mike, and Mike can answer them. So any questions on either sugar bush management or estimating the number of taps per acre?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Peter. That was great. Everybody's homework assignment for the next week is to use that angle gauge and to use also a fixed radius plot to do some of these plots. And it's one thing to listen to watch about it, and it's a whole other thing to go out in the woods and to get that practice. And we want to make sure you get that practice during this class so that if you run into problems or run into questions as you're doing it during the class, you'll have time to give us a call or send us an email with whatever your questions are, or post it in the forum, and maybe somebody else from the class who's been successful will be able to answer it as well. Because this is, one of the most important starting place. Just like, the foundation for your house is the most important thing in your house, your sugar bush is the most important aspect of your maple operation. That's why we, after the introductory session last week, this is the next topic on the agenda. And thanks, Peter, for giving us a great overview of why it's important, how to manage your sugar bush, some of the benefits, and taking that first step to get some data on your woods, to know what you have and how you want to go about managing it.
Thanks. I enjoyed it very much. So we do have a couple of questions, if I can go ahead and answer those. So Robin says, so the letters on my screen are not showing up very well, so I can read the question, but the names are faint. So if I mispronounce your name, I apologize in advance. So Robin says, I recently lost a large 24 to 30 inch maple in a windstorm. When I looked at it, the first 4 or 6 feet had bug damage. Is this going to be a problem? Probably not. So the caveat there is that I'm guessing, probably not, but I'm fairly confident that it probably won't be a problem. The reason why is that there was the reason why I say that it's probably not going to be a problem is because there's some reason why that tree blew down. Healthy trees just don't blow down for no reason. There's some decay in the root system, or the bud of the tree had some decay, and so the stem snapped. Whatever there was, something had caused a problem that predisposed it to a likelihood of falling over. The bugs that you probably saw were responding to the damage of the tree. The bugs probably did not cause the tree to fall over. So if we think about in forest health, we think about primary pathogens and secondary pathogens. So the primary pathogens were what weakened the tree. The bugs that you saw were probably secondary pathogens that came in because the tree had been weakened. So if the question that you're asking deals with the problem being those bugs, the answer is no. What may be a problem is if whatever the primary pathogen was that predisposed that tree to fall, if that happened to other trees, then you may have additional issues. And that's going to be, you can't diagnose usually pest and pathogen problems without being on the ground to look at it. So I would say if look at the crowns of the trees in the spring as the trees leaf out. If you have good green color, if you have an absence of defect in the stem, if the trees seemingly look healthy, then you're probably in pretty good shape. And you can have some pretty prominent scarring on maple trees, and they will still survive very fine for decades and decades. So Kevin says, what do you say the maximum number of taps or trees per acre one should have? I didn't say. So in the guidelines that came out that are downloadable, and Mike's memory will be better than mine, and he'll also know the answer. I think, and it depends a little bit on what you want to accomplish. So if you're a backyard maple producer and you're producing maple for the fun of it, it doesn't matter how many taps you have per acre. You could have 10 or you could have 100. From a commercial perspective, if you're trying to optimize, I'll say it's somewhere between 40 and 60. And Mike can correct me if I'm off by very much.
Yeah, Pete, I would say that there's many sugar bushes that have probably 80 to 100 that if the trees are small enough, it's hard to get 80 to 100 18-inch trees in an acre.
Right.
Or maybe impossible. But a lot of sugar bushes in the 80 to 100 acre where the trees, especially if they've been thinned to that and it's a nice stand and they're growing well, you could easily have that and have a really nice sugar bush. There's pros and cons of more trees per acre. The pros is that you get more taps because you have more trees. The con could be that those trees might not be growing to their potential if they're too crowded. But you have to know the diameter of the trees and how much space these trees have to grow before you make that call. I had to step away for a few minutes during this, Pete, but I don't know if you got into a stocking guide on this.
No, I'm typing in. So if you go, I have an entire hour-long webinar on forest thinning. So if you go to that youtube.com/forestconnect and just type in the search phrase thinning, there's an hour-long session. It's not specific to thinning in a sugar bush, but it goes through configuring or looking at how many trees per acre of different sizes. And Mike's exactly right. I was, my brain was locking in on one particular diameter. But if you have a younger sugar bush, you're going to have more trees per acre, and so you're going to have more taps. As the trees get bigger, some of them are going to die, so you're going to have fewer trees and fewer taps per acre. So in a mature sugar bush, you might be down around 50 to 60. When I said commercial, what I was thinking, in order to make it viable, you would want to have at least 40 to 50 to 60 to make it worth your while to get started as a commercial producer. So,
and when we get into the session on tubing installation and sap collection, you'll see that the number of taps per acre has a big impact on your tubing cost per acre. That the more taps you have per acre, the lower the cost is per tap. And so that's what separates out some average sugar bushes from maybe poor ones or great ones.
So I'll just, in the picture that we're looking at, this is a picture from this past summer where we had the maple camp at Arnott Forest, and these are two of the participants, and they're going through the exercises that Mike described that you all are going to be doing, putting in plots and putting in points. But I'll call so the number of taps per acre, just because you have a maple tree doesn't mean you should tap it. And I'll call your attention to the fact that you see the blue tubing. This maple tree is tapped. This maple tree is tapped. This is not, and as you look, some of these smaller trees in the background do not have taps in them. So you may have 100 maple trees per acre, but you may look at the trees and say, okay, some of the trees that are in the lower crown class, shorter than the main canopy or smaller diameter. Remember, those smaller diameter trees need to be growing very fast in order to comply with the tapping guidelines. So you may be, just because you have those trees, it may not be to your advantage to tap them. So, all right, Kevin says, is there a preferred time of year to thin the woods? I would say there's an unpreferred time of year to thin the woods, and that's going to be from about the end of maple season, so somewhere around late March to early to mid-April into mid-June. And I say that only because as the trees are leafing out, and remember, each year the tree puts on a new layer of wood. During that time of year, that spring season, that new layer of wood is forming beneath the bark. So the bark needs to be more flexible so the tree can expand. And that flexibility makes the bark less tightly adhere less tightly to the stem of the tree. So if you're in the woods and you're felling trees or you're driving your tractor around and you bump into a tree during that time of year, there's a high probability you're going to end up with a large wound. And large is anything other than the threshold is about 250 square inches. So 10 inches by 25 inches is considered a large wound. I would be more conservative than that in my definition of a large wound. So if you bump a tree in December, you might, just have, a baseball-sized nick. If you bump a tree in the middle of May, you may have, a wound that's, the size of 2 or 3 paper plates. It really doesn't, with equipment, it doesn't take very much. Even felling the trees, if one tree falls against another, you may skin the bark down the whole length of the tree if you do that during the spring season. So that's a good time to do. You have lots of other things you can do during that time of year. That's also black fly season. So my recommendation is don't go in the woods if you can help it during black fly season. And there's lots of other things you can do. You're cleaning up your evaporator. You're thinking about your marketing plan. You're doing whatever. So you can, go into the woods at other times of the year. Or if you are in the woods, use that time of year to mark the trees, but don't actually do the cutting and the felling until later in the year. All right. Any other questions? Let me make sure none came in. Let me scroll backwards. All right, so I will, Mike, what do you know about tapping and organic certification?
The guidelines vary by certifying organization. So depending on the state you're in, or the country you're in, it's going to vary. And there's many different certifying organizations. So here in New York, most people use NOFA New York, but there's also other organizations that also do organic certification, and they would have potentially different types of tapping guidelines and other types of guidelines for certification. So it's worth shopping around to see what program might work for you. If you decide you want to get organic certified, I can say that right now is a very good time to get organic certified, especially if you're selling bulk syrup. bulk syrup pricing is going to be pretty terrible this year because of the Canadian exchange rate. We're probably going to see prices not much above $2 a pound, but there will be a 20-cent pound, probably at least a 20-cent pound premium for organic, which will easily pay for your certification fees if you're a large enough producer. You need to do the cost benefit to see how much it's going to cost you to get certified versus what that premium will be. And for large producers selling bulk, those are most of the people who get certified because it makes financial sense to do so. There's some other advantages of getting certified, is that it forces you to do some paperwork that you might not otherwise want to do. And nobody likes to do the paperwork, but from a business perspective, it's good to have those records. It's good to keep track of what you're doing. So it's one of the hidden benefits that you might not really think is a benefit when you have to do it, but later on, I guess it's like eating your vegetables. So, so I would encourage people to look into it, especially the bulk, and then depending on your markets for retail, some retail consumers are looking for organic, but not usually the ones who go to buy it directly from you. If they're going to get the syrup directly from you, you have an opportunity to interact with them and discuss how it's basically organic. The big markets for organic are the accounts that are selling into urban and suburban markets where people just want to buy organic food but don't necessarily know how maple syrup is produced, and they just naturally gravitate towards anything with the organic label on it. So people that actually go to buy syrup from you pretty much know what syrup is, and they understand it's a wild product from natural forests. So they're not worried about it being sprayed with different chemicals and whatnot. So it's a decision you'll have to make depending on what your production and sales strategy is.
So, Mike, do you know, Corinne wants to know, they're NOFA Vermont certified. Do you know, like I heard that NOFA has a 9-inch minimum diameter. Do you know?
Yeah, it's a 9-inch minimum diameter, and you're actually allowed to tap trees smaller than that if you're planning on cutting them out. So it's almost there's some people out there who think rather than doing Sugarbush management, you just tap every tree that you could drill a hole into, and that's going to be the form of self-thinning. And so some people will tap the 6, 7, or 8-inch trees, and instead of in the event that they know they're going to cut them out at a later date when they can get to it, which is fine, or it's just as some people do it as a way. They say, well, it'll be self-thinning, and every tree in the woods will eventually die. The trees will self-thin on their own. The purpose of tonight's lecture and Sugarbush management in general is that you get to choose which trees survive and how long they live for, and you get to focus the growth on your best trees so that, as Peter showed earlier, that they meet the minimum growth in order to comply with the tapping guidelines. So I can say in general, there's not really any science or logic behind a lot of the organic certification standards. A lot of people question why they are what they are in various states and provinces, and there's no national standards. The USDA doesn't have, they do have it for, say, corn or soy or wheat, but they don't have it for maple. And so each organization has come up with their own standards, which may or may not make sense.
So Corinne's describing, and I can't verify one way or the other. If NOFA says that you're supposed to offset 12 inches vertically and 6 inches laterally from the previous year's hole, I guess my concern about that, I mean, what they're having you do is avoid that column of discoloration. The problem with that significant of an offset is that you're gonna very quickly come back to where you started, and then if the tree has healed over, then you won't know where you had previously tapped, and so you're going to place yourself at a higher risk of tapping into that discoloration. I would rather see tighter tapping. So there may be other ways to think about this. My preferences, and the way we instruct the people tapping at the R-Knot, is to offset an inch to an inch and a half up to 2 inches, and then go vertically 4 to 6 inches to make sure you're at least 8 inches away. And that 8 inches is as much to make sure you don't draw vacuum from the current hole over to the previous hole. If the previous hole hasn't filled, then you can get a vacuum leak because you're sucking air through the wood. So that's why you want to get that further distance away.
Yeah, and another thing, and we try to get even further if possible, because you want to get as far away from that stained column, and you want to get closer to other white sapwood. Because if you're right up against a stained column of non-conductive sapwood, non-conductive heartwood or compartmentalized wood, the brown streaks that are caused by the tap holes, the closer you are to those, the less opportunity you have for sap to flow to your tap hole. And especially under vacuum, you're drawing sap from a large portion of the tree. It's not just the sap that would normally be flowing down the tree by gravity. And therefore, the more white wood you have around your tap hole, the more sap you're likely going to get. And we've had, especially if you're tapping some older trees that have been tapped for a very long time, whether it's your Sugarbush or it took over somebody else's, if there's a lot of decay columns in the tree, you have a very good chance of potentially drawing air into your system, not just necessarily from last year's tap hole, but maybe one from a long time ago. We've had instances of that where it was just you could hear the vacuum leak coming from the spout, and from something on the complete opposite side of the tree where there was a rotten spot on the tree. And that just comes down to that the subject of this lecture, which is Sugarbush management and taking care of your good trees and harvesting the ones that you don't want there anymore because they're interfering with your good ones, or they're in a state of decline that you want to get them out.
So Kevin has a question. He says he works in Sugarbush. It's been tapped for more than 50 years, considers themselves to be at high risk of drilling into stained wood. What are your recommendations? So I'll give mine, and then Mike can give his. It's going to take you longer to tap, because what you need to do is spend time looking for areas of the tree where you have to do visually vertical projections from each of the old tap holes. Now, some of those, and we have, like, the R-Knot Forest was the first Sugarbush that Cornell had, and it was started in the mid to late 60s. It was a few years before the E-line was started. So we have close to 50 years of tapping in that Sugarbush, and it was over-tapped for years, and it was tapped with very large diameter. I mean, they were the standards at the time, but what we know now is that it was over-tapped by perspective, and the larger diameter spouts. So we too had a lot of trouble with that. So it's going to take you more time to find where you can tap. Tap as shallowly as you can, because you're trying to avoid that stained wood. By all means, take the extra time to start marking your tap holes and developing a pattern. So we always, on one tree, you always go to the left or you always go to the right. Mike started, from what I saw, Mike was the first one that I saw using the paint spots. The paint spots are worth their weight in gold. I can't speak highly enough of that as a process, because after a few years, you're going to develop a pattern. You'll see you're always going to the right. The wood that's to the left of where you started, the tree, the circumference of the tree to the left of where you're starting, all that's doing now is just accumulating wood. So by the time you get over there, it's going to take a long time to do that. But you're going to be, every year that you have success finding a new piece of wood, that gives you another year you're buying on tree growth. So, and then to make that happen, your drop lines have to be long enough to reach to wherever you're finding fresh wood. So, Mike, what are your additions to that?
Well, in addition to that, I would also say that there's some research out of UVM this past year showing that under high vacuum with good tap hole sanitation, a new spout, and a newer, relatively new drop line, if you have high vacuum, you can actually tap below the lateral line. Get into new, fresh white wood that hasn't been tapped for maybe ever, depending on, or a long time. Maybe it used to be buckets if it was 50 years ago, and so it was lower, and then more recently it's been tubing and they've been higher. But you'll get into that new white wood down below, and you could see great increases in yield. The caveat is that you need to have high vacuum, and it needs to be a new spout, relatively new drop line on that.
So what's high vacuum?
I would say mid-20s.
All right. So that leaves the R knot out.
And I would reinforce what Peter said about taking your time on those as well. I mean, if you're going to go below the lateral line, well, there's plenty of places to find. You don't have to look very hard. If you're going to tap above the lateral line, we have one of the same issues here at Cornell at Eline Forest. Our tree's been tapped for 50 years, and the same thing. They were, I would say, over-tapped, but they didn't know it at the time. But maybe 2 7/16 spouts on some of these trees, and trees don't grow nearly as well up here as they do at the R-Knot either. So we have some serious challenges in trying to tap our larger, older trees. And you could spend at least a minute, sometimes 2 minutes, looking for the best spot before you drill the hole. What we do is we take the drop line, and your drop line should be fairly long too, because you want to. The shorter the drop line, the less area you have to look for your spout. Maybe we'll get into this more next week. But when you're tapping, before you drill a hole, you make sure that your drop line can reach there. You might find this great spot, but if your drop line can't reach and you drill the hole, then you're in trouble.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. So you want to have long drop lines, and you want to put it up your tree, look to see where a good spot is. If you think it looks good, then you really scour that tree, and you look up and down for anything that looks like it could be an old tap hole, because sometimes after many years they're kind of hidden on the surface, but they're not hidden below the surface. And so when you drill in, if you're within that column, and some of the boards, those tap hole boards that Peter showed you earlier, those were taken from the E-line where we cut out some of the old dead and dying trees. And there was lots of those overlapping tap holes from people not being careful enough. And you really want to be careful. I mean, the hole you drill, where you put it, how you drill the hole, how you set the spout has a huge impact on how much sap you get out of that tree. And you really want to take your time and make sure you do that right.
Okay, the last question, Corian wants to know why to use a new spout when you're tapping below the lateral line.
I'll take that, Peter. It doesn't matter if it's below or above. You always want to use a new spout, because the good analogy is just like if you go to give blood, they don't give you a nice used syringe. They give you a new one, a new needle. And no matter how well you've tried to sanitize and clean an old spout, you did not clean it properly. I don't care how hard you tried, you didn't do it, because the only way, unless you're using stainless, the only type of spout that you can sterilize is a stainless spout. All the other plastic or polycarbonate, nylon, whatever, they're plastic, they're porous. You're not going to be able to properly sanitize them. So for the 18 to 40 cents, whatever you're going to spend on your spout every year, the payback in extra sap more than pays for itself every year.
Well, I want to thank Mike for the opportunity to visit with you all and share these presentations on Sugarbush management and estimating taps. I had a lot of fun doing it. Both of these were fairly new. The tap estimation was completely new. The other management one was significantly reworked. So it was a fun opportunity to develop these, and I'll make sure that Mike has copies of them and that you can get access to copies of these. So, and I've put out my email address. Please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me an email. I can give you my phone number as well, but hang on, I can't type and talk at the same time. So you're welcome to call me. I'm hard to get a hold of by phone, but if we do get a hold of by phone, I enjoy chatting. So phone or email, and thanks. I appreciate it. Any closing words, or they have their homework assignments, Mike, or?
We'll make sure that the homework, that the data sheets are on the course folder. I did not double check to make sure that they were put there, but Steve Gabriel he couldn't join us tonight, but I will check with him tomorrow to make sure that if they're not there, he can put them up. And then once you have those, Steve is also mailing you the angle gauge unless you were able to print it off yourself if you wanted to get out there before you get it in the mail. And go out there and practice. Hopefully we'll get some nice days wherever you are. It is winter up here, but winter's still not a bad time to go out there and do that. You can see easily as long as it's not snowing too hard, and get some practice and take your data and know how good a Sugarbush you have. And if you do it now, if you run into questions, myself and Peter are available to work with you on it. So thanks, everyone.